So today on All About Adoption, we're going to talk about surviving a failed adoption. Unfortunately, when a family's looking at adopting domestically, there are some families experience failed adoptions. So we're going to talk about how to survive if this happens to your family. Hi, I'm Stephanie A. I'm the founder and executive director here at Adoption and Beyond, where we help families form through adoption. So unfortunately, when we're talking about domestic adoptions, a lot of times you'll find that there are very few stats that you can pull for a domestic adoptions. But the last stat that I saw in my research online, there's about 25% of domestic adoptions end up not going through to an adoption. And so, on the one hand, that means 75% of the adoptions do happen. So adoptions happen more often than not. But when you fall in that 25%, it is absolutely devastating to have an adoption that you thought and was hoping for not end up occurring. So we're going to talk about how to survive that. When I have families enter into the adoption process, I always tell them to remain cautiously optimistic. It's better if you prepare yourself for either outcome and you just keep that front and center and know that this adoption could go either way, because a mom has a right to decide to parent her child as she should. But that way, if this were to happen, you will have anticipated that it could happen, and then that way you're a little more prepared for it if it were to occur. If you do experience a failed adoption, the first thing that you're going to want to do is you're going to want to blame someone. You are going to go through the stages of grief, and one of those is anger. And typically you'll find that you want to blame someone for this adoption not occurring. And the reality of it is there is no one to blame. It just, I say the phrase, it is what it is. It's just something that occurred and there is no one to blame. So when you get to the anger stage, just knowing that blaming someone is not going to help the situation and it won't help you move forward in the grief process. So one thing I recommend, the big thing, is just to give yourself time. Give yourself time to grieve the loss of this adoption and just to be gentle on yourself and to know that there's going to be lots of people around you, family and friends, who are going to want to, well, first of all, some will say nothing at all because they don't know what to say. But you're also going to find people will say things that just aren't very helpful to your grief process. So just be prepared for those insensitive comments that they're not meaning to be insensitive. It is what it is. What they have to say is just not helpful to you in your grief process. So just know that, just take your time. And another thing too with a failed adoption is that the grief is complicated because there's not with a death, it's finite, it's final, and you have a person to grieve, and that it's just a lot more concrete. But with a failed adoption, it's a complicated grief because there is still a child out there who is living, and they're just living with their birth family. And so it's really hard to grieve with a failed adoption because there's not that final status like that comes with grieving a death. One of my biggest pieces of advice is I talked about taking time to grieve that loss and making sure that when you enter back in to the adoption process, that you are able to separate what happened with this first mom that you were working with and the next mom you're going to be working with. Because a lot of families will go in fearful and they are obviously, you've been hurt, so you're a little more reserved, and you just have to remember that's not the mom who changed her mind and decided to parent. She deserves that you are just as hopeful and happy to be working with her just as you were that first mom you were working with. And so we find sometimes families have what's called a self-fulfilling prophecy when they bring the grief from a previous adoption into the next one, and the mom can pick up on that. And so it's important that you leave that adoption in the past you grieve it, and you move on when you're at a point where you can be hopeful and excited about working with another mom. So I hope you found this helpful, and please feel free to subscribe. We have education each week, and I hope you have a good rest of your day. Thanks.